Welcome to this short and innovative training program on outcome-based education. Outcome-based education is a change in our attitude towards teaching learning process where we are ensuring the expected learning of our participants through various teaching, learning, and assessment activities. When we think about outcome-based education and expected learning levels of our students, we need to have a basic idea about Bloom's taxonomy where the different levels of learning is defined. So starting from remember, that is the basic starting point of learning. We need the learning means we must be able to remember something and we need to understand and finally it goes through apply, analyze, evaluate and finally if the student is able to create something new, we can say he is reaching at the highest level of learning. And when we think about the OBE and learning outcomes, generally we define learning outcomes and ensure that these outcomes are met or attained by our participants. So there are outcomes like program outcomes, program specific outcomes, and course outcomes. And all these outcomes should be measurable, observable, and these must be specific statements clearly indicates what the student will be able to do or what skills the student will be attaining at the end of learning. The outcomes generally it should start with an action verb which indicates what the student will be able to do, and we need to clearly say in which subject area the student will be attaining this learning, and also the level of achievement of the student in different levels of Bloom's taxonomy. So each outcome should be clearly indicating at what levels of Bloom's taxonomy this leveling the learning will be happening, and if there are some conditions to be met for this learning process. We suppose we need to provide some materials for students to refer, or some survey data has to be given for performing this or demonstrating this outcome. We need to mention that. Then there is a confusion regarding the objectives and outcomes in OBE framework. Usually, people say learning objectives and learning outcomes are the same, but they are not the same. The objectives are the objectives set by the teacher. So this is plans and aspirations of the teacher before he starts teaching. So for this workshop, I can keep my objectives like this, introducing OBE framework and teaching about learning outcomes. So before I start my session, this is my plans and aspirations. And if I meet the objectives, my participants, there's a chance that my participants will also be attaining their outcomes. Then coming to writing different learning outcomes, there are specific ways of writing these outcomes. And for giving you a clear understanding, I start with a not a better way of writing outcomes. So I can say the outcomes of this workshop can be upon completion of this workshop, the participants will have knowledge about OBE, familiarity with the OBE terminologies, understanding about OBE concepts and all. So if I keep my outcomes like this, it will be very difficult for the participants to demonstrate these outcomes, to demonstrate this knowledge and familiarity. And also for a resource person, it will be very difficult to assess whether you have attained this. So instead of this, if I rewrite my outcomes like this, upon completion of this workshop, the participants will be able to describe various components of OBE in education with confidence. So if you are able to describe, it means you are at the first level of Bloom's taxonomy and you are able to remember something and you are describing. So it is at the first level of Bloom's taxonomy. And if I say you will be able to describe the process of assessment. So this process of assessment you will be able to describe only after getting an understanding. And then if I keep my third outcome like this, you are able to calculate the attainment of outcomes. So if you are able to calculate this, you are able to apply something what you have learned. So we are reaching at the L4 or L3 or L4 learning level 4 or 3 or 4 of the Bloom's taxonomy. And if I say you will be able to evaluate the performance of students, you are reaching at the topmost or the top layers of Bloom's taxonomy, and you are able to evaluate the performance based on OBE framework. And finally, suppose if I keep my outcome like this, upon completion of this, you will be able to develop your program outcomes, program specific outcomes, and course outcomes with confidence. you are reaching at the topmost level of Bloom's taxonomy. And looking at this course outcomes, this is the right way of defining learning outcomes. Uh, it is measurable, and you will be able to demonstrate these outcomes after completion of this. And also, it clearly defines at what level of Bloom's taxonomy these outcomes are reaching. So, again, coming to the definition of uh, defining the learning outcomes, the learning outcomes must be having uh, three components at least. It must be saying what the student will be able to do by using a verb, and in which context the students will be doing this, and a clear object for the verb, which will be saying how well the student will be able to perform this. And when we think about the learning outcomes, the fundamental duty the teachers perform or the education institutions, the fundamental teaching learning process happens with courses. So we all teach courses for different programs. So teaching courses is the fundamental activity happening with the any course, any uh, program. So the courses, we need to have course outcomes, and course outcomes are the fundamental building blocks of outcome-based education. So course outcomes clearly says what a student will be able to do or perform at the end of a course. So what skills, abilities the students will be attaining by doing that course. If we are able to define this the way which I have explained, we will be able to define the courses. And once again, we would like to remind you that the outcomes must be observable and measurable. Thank you.